Back to back 96, 97. Anyway, net decking. I want to talk about net decking. This is something I've been thinking about all day. This is not a question that one of my students asked me, but I decided to just make 3 videos in a row because I haven't done anything in a while. What is net decking? Net decking is a term that comes from card games, competitive card games. And net decking is the idea that rather than coming up with your own deck list, which is to say your own choice of the cards that go into your deck in a given card game, you just look up deck lists online. You see what people are playing. And so in Hearthstone, right, you just, if you have the cards, you can just look up what the most successful people are doing. And in Yu-Gi-Oh, this happens, and in Magic, this happens, and certain formats, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is, you find the decks that people have used that are effective, and you just steal it, right? Like you just do that exact same thing that they did. And I think this is something people should do in debate. And if you're not doing it, you're working harder than you need to. And I don't think there's a significant detriment to net decking. What would net decking be in the context of debate? It's going to be all the things that are kind of in that list and that we'll break down. But the bottom line is net decking is using other people's arguments rather than writing your own, which again, I'm a huge proponent of. So why should you do it? Number one is it is just straight up the most efficient way to learn about debate and to get better at debate. Is reading an entire book on Marx good? Yes. That alone probably isn't even enough for you to write a Marx K. You need to read several Marx books. So you need to read Marx and you need to read Lenin, or you need to read Marx and Lenin and Mao, or you need to read, the like trans women of color who led later Marxist movements, or Peruvian Marxist movements, or whatever, right? But the bottom line is that would be the best in theory for you to read 4,000 pages of Marxist texts from different perspectives and to really understand it. But you will win 95% the same amount of debates if you just look at what the best Marxist arguments are that are actually being read in debate and then use those, or use those and slightly modify them. And so there's just no argument to be made that it's not efficient. This is also true of blocks, right? When I first became an MG and I was struggling with it, I basically was able to supplement my skill by just using blocks that Mike Selk had written a few years before, right? That even to a certain degree were out of date. And it was hilarious because I remember debating Texas Tech GK. I think it was like Nationals Elam 5 or something. And Logan was like, hello, like you can't read blocks from 2011 and win the debate. But then we did. And we did it all year. Like I would just win reading Mike Self blocks pretty much because they were good blocks. And I've mentioned this before, but like, look, I know for a fact that up to a certain level, if my kids just read the stuff that I wrote down, like they're very likely to win against most people, especially in sort of like LD or whatever, where they can read it word for word and don't need to do a whole ton of thinking on their own. Now, I don't have why shouldn't you do it written down here, but one, you should do it. But why do people think you should not do it? They think you shouldn't do it because a lot of people end up getting stuck here. Okay, this is all they do. They net deck forever. They just always steal other people's arguments, which means they never learn to write their own. They never learn to modify them. They never improve their actual skills because they're just using things other people did. And I'm certainly not recommending you do that, but I don't think that has to be the case. I think that you can always begin by looking at what other people did, and then once you have a grasp of it, move forward faster. And I think doing this lets you skip a lot of the sort of growing pains that aren't necessary and don't contribute to you being significantly better. So how should you do it? Number one is just stealing from wikis. This isn't a thing in Parley because, well, kind of is, but not from Parley wikis. If you're in Parley, there's nothing stopping you from looking up policy backfiles or LD backfiles on specific Ks, whether that's at the high school level or the college level, and then incorporating that argument or those analyses into your debates. I do this all the time throughout the year. I just look at the CETA wiki or the high school wiki and just kind of see like what are people saying against the cap K, or what's the current like dominant trend in answering anti-blackness or things like that. Whatever it might be, you just look at what the best minds in debate are doing, and like honestly, I think it's kind of ridiculous to not be willing to look at the best debaters and the best coaches in the country and think you could learn something from them, or think that they have a few ideas that you could kind of um, borrow from. So you just look at the wiki and just, like, this could be something as, like, kind of lame to a certain degree as just literally reading word for word someone else's app. But at a minimum, you can look at, like, what is Western Kentucky doing in Lincoln Douglas debate? What are the apps they're reading? What are the disabs they're reading? And how can you take those concepts, or even literally take those cards and maybe do your own cut of them or whatever, and use that to your advantage and save yourself a lot of time. Number two, steal from people you admire and respect. I used to just watch every SIU RS debate video ever, or every video of Sam from UT Tyler debating ever, and just transcribe all of it, write it down word for word, and just read it. And it's funny because now, like, some of the Pacific kids have, like, found the back files or whatever when I was there, and they're, like, reading positions that are like 45%, 55% what I had left there, which is like 65% just what Sam Cooke was reading in 2016 or whatever. And so those things are still effective at times for people. But the bottom line is, if you think someone's good, like, take their stuff, look into what they're looking into, and try and be better at it, and try and take shortcuts, right? Like, I don't think there's really a shortcut to being legitimately good, but there's certainly a more efficient way to do it than the not efficient way of doing it, which again would be like just genuinely becoming an expert on these subjects. Three, steal from your teammates and team's back files, right? If you have a good teammate, use their stuff, read their app, read variations of their app, use their cards. There's no, really issue with doing that, and as long as they're okay with it, and they almost always are, right? Because you are a team. Use back files that your team has written. I think this is one of the big advantages that some of the best programs have, is they just have, like, back files from every year ever where they were one of the top, 20, top 10 programs in the country, and had some of the best debaters of all time. I think that if you're not combing through those things, just to at least understand what was going on then, and to kind of understand how the meta's developed since then, I think you're making a mistake. And I think you're certainly being inefficient. And then lastly, ultimately, you're trying to become the person that people steal from, right? Like, you shouldn't stop at, okay, I just took everything everyone ever used and never contributed everything. It's kind of important that you continue that trend, and it's really cool. It's really cool when you're at a tournament and you see people reading blocks that you wrote, or a card that you cut, or something to that effect, right? It's, I've talked to Ali about this, but, like, it's pretty awesome for Ali, and I'm sure for a bunch of other people, when Alison Escalante, when people in debate are just reading articles they wrote, right? Not even just cards that they cut or something, or arguments that they pioneered. Like, they're citing them as evidence in these debates. And I guess what I really mean when I get to the decent point is, I'm not saying people actually will steal your stuff or whatever, but what I'm trying to say is, you have to stop being purely reliant on net decking at some point. I think you can net deck forever. I'll be completely honest. I net deck all the time to these days. I think it's just the most efficient way. Most years in Lincoln Douglas debate, I just wait until the best teams have started doing stuff, and then try and figure out what the meta is from there. Last year, it's pretty much just like, cool, what did Nick Wallenberg think was a good idea this year? And then try and read something similar to that, right? In a lot of years, it's what did Western Kentucky do? Similarly, like in Parley, like I said, I used to take UT Tyler stuff, or we took Washburn's long form framework shell, and then we used some of the Berkeley stuff for their long form framework shell. But at some point, you have to be able to do it on your own, because if you're just reliant on even your coaches, you're never going to be that successful. And there's going to be a point where you hit a skill level where the other people are the people you're net decking from, and you won't really be able to do anything about it unless you develop your own style and your own skill set and your own wheelhouse. That's the last video I'm making tonight. Proteus Academy. Tightest crew moving.